All right, so today we're diving into a case that's equal parts heartbreaking and frustrating.
Yeah.
The disappearance and death of Ebby Steppach. We've got a whole lot of articles and reports, even some interviews to try to make sense of it all. What we're really trying to do today is not just figure out what happened, but see how the investigation itself might have contributed to this really tragic outcome.
Yeah, what's so fascinating about this case to me is how it exposes these deep-rooted problems in missing persons investigations. It's a stark reminder of how crucial those initial steps are and how things can go wrong so fast.
Right, and just for anyone who needs a refresher, Ebby Steppach was 18 years old, a high school senior, living in Little Rock, Arkansas when she vanished back in October 2015. I know you followed this case closely, so you probably remember her car was found abandoned in a park. And for years, there were just so many more questions than answers.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the details surrounding her abandoned car, they're immediate red flags. It just doesn't fit the typical runaway scenario.
So let's rewind back to October 24th, 2015. Ebby goes to a party. Seems like a pretty normal weekend for a teenager, right?
Yeah.
But then the next day, she tells her mom and her stepdad that she was sexually assaulted at that party. And she even thinks it might have been recorded.
Whoa, that detail about the recording is huge. If that existed, it could have been a game changer in the investigation. The question is, was it ever found? Did they even look for it?
And that's what's so baffling. Later that same day, things get worse. Ebby calls her brother Trevor. She sounds completely disoriented. She tells him she's outside his house, but he goes to check and she's not there.
Oh, wow. That's a serious red flag right there. Confusion, a possible assault, and then she vanishes. Seems like the police should have immediately realized this wasn't just a typical teenager running away.
Right, and just a few minutes later, she calls Trevor again. This time she's in her car, but she has no idea where she is. Her last words to him are, "I'm messed up," and then the call drops. Can you imagine how panicked Trevor must have been?
Ugh, it's just heartbreaking to think about. But you know, from an investigative standpoint, those phone calls are gold. They tell us her state of mind, maybe even her location. Were those calls properly traced? Analyzed? That's a question I have for Little Rock PD.
It's mind-boggling, because 2 days later, her car is found in Chalamont Park. But it's a weird scene. The gas tank's empty, the battery's dead, the key's in the ignition, and all her personal stuff, her phone, her purse, it's all gone. It's almost like it was staged right, like someone wanted it to look like she just wandered off.
You know, I'm glad you brought that up. It's not just about the car being abandoned, it's the specifics. The dead batteries suggest the car wasn't driven there recently. And the missing stuff points to something more deliberate than a spur-of-the-moment decision to run away.
And this is where it gets really infuriating. Despite all these red flags, the police initially classify her disappearance as a runaway case. It's like they didn't even consider foul play.
I know it's easy to criticize in hindsight, but I have to wonder, what were the protocols back then? Was there some kind of checklist to evaluate risk in these cases? Did they even look at Ebby's assault report? Or did they just jump to the simplest explanation?
Those are the questions that haunt this case.
Yeah.
You think the sexual assault report alone would have pushed them to investigate further. And to make matters worse, they didn't even do forensics on the car right away.
Whoa, that's a major misstep right there. You've got potentially crucial evidence, the car, and it's not secured or analyzed. We know now that Ebby's remains were eventually found in that same park. Could they have missed valuable evidence by not thoroughly processing that car and the surrounding area?
That's the question that hangs over this whole case. It's almost like the investigation was doomed from the start. But Ebby's family, they weren't about to let this go. They launched their own searches, hired private investigators. They became a force to be reckoned with. They were determined to keep the pressure on.
Yeah, their dedication is incredible. They understood that time was of the essence, that they had to keep this case in the public eye. And in cases like this, public pressure can be a powerful tool to get some answers.
Absolutely. And Ebby's mother, Lori Jernigan, she became such a fierce advocate, not just for her daughter, but for other missing people too. Talk about turning grief into action. She was not going to let her daughter's case be forgotten.
Lori's story is just such a powerful example of the importance of advocacy, but it also makes you wonder, should families have to carry the burden of investigation like that? Should they have to fight tooth and nail just to get the authorities to take them seriously?
That's a question that goes way beyond just Ebby's case. But before we get into that, let's talk about some of the theories that were floating around about Ebby's disappearance.
Yeah, let's unpack those and see if they hold any water. So yeah, you had those early theories floating around. Some people were convinced it was all tied to the sexual assault, maybe even some kind of retaliation. Others thought maybe it was an abduction. or even human trafficking, especially given Little Rock's location.
Yeah, those were definitely making the rounds online and in the news back then. Given everything we know now, do any of those theories stand out to you as more likely?
I mean, it's easy to try and connect the dots, especially with a case this tragic, but without hard evidence, it's all just speculation. And speculation can actually get in the way of a real investigation.
Yeah, good point. Sends investigators down rabbit holes, wastes precious time.
Yeah.
And speaking of wasted time, it wasn't until a full year after Ebby disappeared that the Little Rock PD finally changed her case from runaway to missing person. A whole year. Does that seem like an unreasonable delay to you, given all those red flags we talked about?
A year is a pretty significant delay. Makes you wonder what finally prompted that change. Was it an internal review, public pressure, new evidence? And more importantly, how might things have gone differently if they'd made that change sooner?
It's one of the biggest what-ifs in this whole story. And even with that change, the investigation didn't exactly pick up speed.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's not uncommon. Those early missteps that lost time, it creates this ripple effect. Evidence goes cold, witnesses forget details. It's like trying to solve a puzzle where half the pieces are missing.
They did try to ramp things up after they reclassified the case. They launched a homicide investigation, re-interviewed people, even went back to those sexual assault allegations. Did anything concrete ever come out of that?
That's what I find so interesting. You have this young woman reporting a serious crime, and then she disappears. It's a natural place to start digging. But without that alleged recording, it seems like they hit a wall. Makes you think that initial lack of urgency in securing evidence really came back to bite them.
Oh, absolutely. And they did look into other angles too, possible drug connections, random violence, but nothing really panned out. It's something you see a lot in missing persons cases, isn't it? Grasping at straws, hoping for that one piece of information that will connect everything.
Exactly. You're dealing with bits and pieces of information, unreliable stories, witnesses who might not be telling the whole truth. It's like putting together a puzzle in the dark.
And in Ebby's case, that one missing piece never seemed to surface. Even with the renewed efforts, no arrests were ever made. The case went cold again. But this time, with the added weight of knowing that Ebby wasn't just missing, she was gone.
That's the cruel irony of it all, isn't it? They finally admit she's not a runaway, most likely a victim of foul play. But by then, so much precious time has been lost. It leaves the family, and really anyone following the case, with a deep sense of injustice.
And that lack of closure is something Ebby's family's had to live with for years. They've been very outspoken in their criticism of the police, the missed opportunities, the way their concerns were brushed aside early on.
Yeah, their frustration is completely understandable. It's not just about losing someone you love, it's about the failure of the very system that's supposed to protect you and find justice. It adds another layer of trauma on top of an already unimaginable situation.
It goes way beyond just Ebby's case. Her story became a symbol of the need for change. A call for better handling of missing persons cases, especially those involving young people.
Right. Ebby's case really became a catalyst for a bigger conversation. There were calls for legislative reform, better resources for investigations, specialized training for law enforcement. It highlighted how vulnerable missing youth are, and the biases that can sometimes creep into these investigations.
It's incredible how one family's tragedy can spark such a movement.
Yeah.
But let's shift gears a bit. The investigation was frustrating enough on its own. But then the discovery of Ebby's remains added a whole other layer to this story. It's almost unbelievable where they found her.
You're talking about Chalamont Park, right? The same park where her car was found 3 years earlier. It's a chilling detail, and it really makes you question those initial search efforts.
It really is unbelievable, isn't it? All those searches, the volunteers combing through Chalamont Park.
Right.
And the whole time Ebby's remains were there, hidden in a drainage pipe just a stone's throw from where her car was found. Makes you question the whole search effort.
It's a detail that stays with you. How could they miss that? Were the search protocols just not good enough? Was there a breakdown in communication between the search teams and the folks investigating the car? It raises some serious red flags.
It's like a nightmare scenario. The answers were right there the whole time, but they just couldn't see them. And for Ebby's family, that discovery must have been both a relief and incredibly frustrating. They finally knew what happened to her, but it also confirmed what they'd suspected all along, that the investigation was botched from the get-go.
Yeah, that's the heartbreaking truth of this case. There's closure in finding her remains, but it's overshadowed by the thought that maybe her death could have been prevented. That's a heavy burden for any family to bear.
Absolutely. And even though finding Ebby's remains reignited the investigation, it still didn't lead to any arrests. No one's ever been held accountable for her death.
Yeah, and that's another frustrating piece of this puzzle. Even with the remains, the investigation went nowhere. It shows how hard it is to build a case after so much time has passed and evidence is potentially compromised.
But even though the case remains unsolved, Ebby's story has had a huge impact. It's become this powerful symbol for change, for better handling of missing persons cases.
You're absolutely right. Ebby's case became a catalyst for real reform. People demanded legislative changes, more funding for investigations, and most importantly, a change in how law enforcement approaches these cases.
And that's where Ebby's legacy really comes through, doesn't it? Her story didn't just fade away, it sparked a movement, a demand for accountability and justice.
It really is a testament to her family's strength and the community that rallied around them. They refused to let her memory be forgotten. They took their grief and their anger and turned it into action. They pushed for changes that might prevent other families from going through the same thing.
And they've made a difference. There are new protocols in place now, more resources for missing persons investigations, and a greater awareness of the complexities of these cases. That's got to be some solace in all of this.
Absolutely. Ebby's case serves as a constant reminder that we can't become complacent. We have to keep advocating for better systems, better training, better support for families searching for their loved ones.
And it's not just about systemic changes either. It's about community involvement too. Think about those early searches for Ebby, the volunteers, the social media campaigns, the vigils. It was a real community effort.
Yeah, that's so important. It reminds us that we all have a part to play in these cases, whether it's sharing information, supporting organizations that help missing persons, or just being there for a grieving family. Every action matters.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Ebby Steppach's case, we're left with a mix of emotions. Sadness, frustration, but also a glimmer of hope. Hope that her story will continue to inspire change, that her memory will live on, and that other families won't have to face the same pain and uncertainty that Ebby's family has had to endure.
Ebby's case might be unsolved, but her legacy lives on. She's become a symbol of the fight for justice, a reminder that even in the face of tragedy, we can push for a better future, a future where every missing person gets the attention and resources they deserve, and every family can find the answers they're so desperately searching for.